Hey guys, this is Ryan from Old School Automotive. Today I've got a helper. This is my oldest Gus.
Hi.
And as you can see behind us, today we're working on a 1968 Mustang Coupe. This has got the inline six cylinder, which I'm personally a fan of. I think they're really cool, and you don't see a lot of them. So many of these cars get swapped to V8s. And to see a car like this running the straight six is really awesome. It's got the Australian cylinder head with the detachable intake manifold, really cool. But anyway, what we're doing today on this car is we're going to be doing a little bit of front end work. The owner, Ron, has brought us some roller spring perches for the front end, and we're also going to be doing the Shelby Arning upper control arm relocation, which I'm a fan of because it costs nothing but labor. There's no parts involved. You just have to drill a pair of new holes and relocate the upper control arm and then do an alignment. So you're talking a strictly labor-only operation, and it alters the suspension geometry so that you get a much more aggressive camber curve, so that when your car goes into a turn and the weight transfer causes the body to lean, that tire will aggressively react, more aggressively rather than the factory suspension curve, causing you to get a lot more grip. They design these cars with understeer from the factory, which means if you go into a tight turn and you apply a lot of steering input, the front tires are going to tend to lose traction and plow the car. The car will plow straight ahead before the rear end breaks loose, as opposed to the stereotypical modern day Mustangs, which you see in the YouTube videos all the time. These cars are coming out of car shows and they hit the gas and the rear end comes right around and it flips. That's what Ford in the 60s didn't want to happen. So they purposely designed the front end to lose traction before the rear end. Whereas modern Mustangs, they actually handle really well, and people aren't used to that and they tend to swap ends. Anyway, the point of this long and rambling little story is Carroll Shelby figured out that by dropping the upper control arm mounting locations between an inch and an inch and a half, depending, seriously improves the front suspension geometry for performance handling. For a street car, 1 inch drop is about perfect because you don't risk binding your ball joints. If you cut and re-weld your upper control arms at the upper ball joint mounting location, or if you use a negative wedge kit, you can drop it 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches, and get the maximum potential out of it. But that's really more than most people need for a street car. I run a 1 inch drop myself. This car is going to get a 1 inch drop. A 1 inch drop works really nicely. It doesn't lower the car significantly. We're only talking maybe 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch of lowering the front of the car, which does lower the center of gravity some, but we're not getting that lowered look, which is what we don't want. We want to keep kind of a factory stealthy look going on here. So anyway, I'm going to sign off for now, and we're going to do a little time-lapse video as we do the front upper control arm relocation and the roller spring perches. And we'll stop every once in a while and give you a little bit of heads up as to what's going on. Check back with you later.
All right, as with any project that involves cars up on jacks, you want to make sure you secure it on jack stands. Never rely on the jacks alone to support the weight of the vehicle, especially if you're going to be working underneath it. Now here, the owner, Ron, is going to be removing the shock absorber, because the shock absorber acts like a limiting strap to the suspension, and also because we're going to use a spring compressor that compresses the spring from inside the coil. A lot of people try to use a McPherson strut style compressor that uses 2 jack screws on the outside of the coil, and those do work, but you do have to remove the outer shock tower in order to get those on there, and they don't work that well. So I have a homemade style spring compressor here. It uses a piece of all thread, some welded metal, and it bolts on through the center of the coil. It bolts onto the spring perch itself in the same location that the shock was, and then it uses the upper shock location to compress the coil spring. In this manner, the coil spring is completely captured so that if something slips or goes wrong, the coil spring isn't going to come fly out and try to kill you. As can happen with the McPherson strut spring compressors. Those things can slip, and those coils are as dangerous as a loaded gun, so you need to be really careful. Here we're unbolting the 2 nuts that hold the upper control arm pivot to the shock tower, and once we get those unbolted, we're going to move the upper control arm out of the way and secure the spindle with baling wire so it doesn't overstress the brake lines. Then just a little bit of wire wheel action to remove the crud so we have a nice clean surface to work with, and we're ready for our next step.
Alrighty guys, as you can see, we've got the front coil spring pulled out, and we've got the upper control arm out of the way. And whenever you're working with your brakes and you have your suspension disconnected, you always want to safety wire this back out of the way so that the brake hose itself isn't what's supporting the weight, because that can cause the rubber to crack or tear or cause damage inside the hose, and it's just not good. You just want to avoid that. So anyway, let's climb in here a little bit. We got the upper control arm pulled out of its two mounting points here, and I got all the perma dirt, as I like to call it, wire wheeled off, so we have a nice flat space. And this is the metal template that comes with a lot of your kits for doing this. Like you get a negative wedge kit, they'll come with this, which is where I got this from when I put a negative wedge kit on my car. But this isn't really necessary. You can just use those paper templates that you have online and print them out and stick them on here. And as long as you center punch your holes right, there's really no need for the metal. I just have the metal, so why wouldn't I use it? So what we're gonna do is we take a couple of 1/2-inch coarse thread bolts, and basically this is gonna bolt on, and these two holes here are gonna give us our pilot locations. We're gonna drill a pilot hole through. First we're gonna center punch, then we're gonna drill a pilot hole, and we're gonna drill through the shock tower, and that is gonna be our new mounting points for the upper control arm. So by lowering this 1 inch, it's going to change the suspension geometry. So I'm going to go ahead and bolt this on, and you know what? We'll see if we can do a time lapse of the old helmet cam here and see what happens. Cool. All right, guys, as you can see, we've got the front suspension back together on the driver's side. If we come in close and look over the top, you can see the holes where the control arm pivot shaft originally bolted. It's now 1 inch lower. That is going to recurve our suspension. We've got our shock absorber and the new roller spring perch. This roller spring perch incorporates a roller bearing between the perch itself and the shaft that it pivots on. That's going to allow this front suspension to articulate better and free up, because the original style, it had a rubber injected between the shaft and the perch itself, and it was then vulcanized, so it tends to resist movement. By having a roller bearing in here, it allows the suspension to move easier, and actually the suspension can work and then do its job this way. So that's going to free things up a lot here. Basically, the passenger side is going to be the exact same operation that we've already done, and there's no need to showing you that. It's basically the same thing, just a mirror image. Now we just bolt the car back together, give it a quick alignment, and that's pretty much it. That's how you do your Shelby Arning upper A-arm location drop. It'll help our suspension geometry, lower the roll center, make this car handle a lot nicer. We'll catch you next time here at Old School Automotive.